The Dravkarl were the most feared species in the galaxy. For thousands of years, they hunted, conquered, and destroyed civilizations. To them, other species were nothing but weak prey, waiting to be consumed. On their massive warship, Bloodfang, Commander Vorak stood tall. His red eyes glowed in the dim light of the command deck. His sharp claws tapped against the metal railing as he watched the holographic display. The fleet had reached their next target, a small blue planet called Earth. Vorak growled, amused. Another weak race, another easy hunt. His officers chuckled. No species had ever stopped the Dravkarl. Every battle ended the same. Planets burned, civilizations fell, and the Dravkarl feasted on the remains. But something felt different. The scouting reports were strange. No signs of submission. No cries of fear. The humans had received their warnings, yet they did not surrender. Instead, their ships vanished into deep space like ghosts. Their armies went silent. They were preparing. Let them try, Vorak growled. They are only delaying their end. The Dravkarl fleet moved into position, surrounding Earth. Thousands of warships, each one a floating fortress of death, prepared to attack. Their warriors, covered in thick armor and carrying deadly weapons, howled in hunger. The order was given. Begin the hunt. The first wave of attack hit Earth's outer defenses. Human satellites exploded in fireballs. Space stations were shredded apart. The Dravkarl warriors landed on the moon, expecting no resistance. But as soon as their boots touched the ground, the first explosion rocked the surface. A hidden human base came alive with firepower. Missiles shot through the sky, striking Dravkarl landing craft. Soldiers in advanced battle armor emerged from underground bunkers, firing with deadly precision. Vorak watched the battle unfold from his command ship. He leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. "This is unexpected," he muttered. Humans were not running. Humans were fighting. The battle on the moon turned into chaos. The Dravkarl, who had expected an easy slaughter, suddenly found themselves pinned down, their forces dropping fast. Their warships pushed deeper into Earth's atmosphere, ready to crush human cities. But just as they entered, something strange happened. The skies turned deadly. Massive hidden orbital weapons powered up. Human stealth fighters, undetected before, rained destruction on the invaders. Entire Dravkarl warships vanished in fiery explosions. The Dravkarl had never faced an enemy like this. Their usual shock and awe tactics were not working. The humans had studied them and were ready. For the first time in centuries, Vorak felt a new emotion: doubt. In a secret command bunker deep beneath Earth's surface, General Ethan Carter watched the battle unfold. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp. A young officer spoke. "Sir, enemy forces are regrouping. Should we press the attack?" Carter folded his arms. "Not yet. Let them think they have a chance." He glanced at the holographic display. The Dravkarl were arrogant. They believed themselves to be unstoppable. That was their weakness. Carter had studied every war they fought. He knew their patterns, their strategies, their mindset. He had spent years preparing for this moment. And now it was time to show them what humans could do. The officer hesitated. "Sir, do you think we can actually win?" Carter's lips curled into a cold smile. "They think they're the apex predators. We're about to show them. They've never truly met a predator before." Outside, the battle continued, but something had changed. The Dravkarl had arrived expecting another easy victory. Instead, they had walked into a trap. And the hunt had just begun. Vorak watched the battlefield unfold on the holographic display, his claws gripping the armrest of his command chair. The humans were not breaking. That was impossible. Every species before them had crumbled in fear, their planets reduced to lifeless ruins. But Earth was fighting back. The Dravkarl warriors on the moon were being slaughtered. Their elite troops, who had never known defeat, were pinned down and isolated. The landing zones had turned into kill zones, as human soldiers with advanced weapons hunted them through the lunar tunnels. "This is unexpected," Vorak muttered, his voice low and dangerous. A nervous officer approached. "Commander, the humans are using unconventional tactics." Vorak slammed his fist onto the console. "I do not need excuses. Crush them." The order was sent. The full force of the Dravkarl fleet would now descend upon Earth. This war would end today. Or so they thought. As the Dravkarl warships pushed into Earth's atmosphere, a new problem emerged. The humans were hiding. Their cities appeared empty. No civilian signals, no distress calls, just silence. It was a trick, but one the Dravkarl had never seen before. Then, the real trap sprang shut. Massive energy pulses surged from Earth's surface, hitting Dravkarl ships with electromagnetic blasts. Warships powered down, their systems failing. Pilots screamed as their fighters fell from the sky, crashing into the oceans. Then came the second wave. Human stealth bombers appeared from nowhere, launching precision strikes at the largest enemy carriers. One by one, Dravkarl warships exploded in massive fireballs. From his command ship, Vorak's eyes widened in fury. "They knew we were coming," he whispered. Meanwhile, deep in a secret military bunker, General Ethan Carter watched everything unfold. "They took the bait," he said calmly. A nearby officer grinned. "Sir, enemy ships are losing control. Should we send in the counterattack?" Carter nodded. "Deploy the hunters." In the skies above Earth, the next phase of the battle began. From hidden bases in the Arctic, the real human warships launched. These weren't massive like the Dravkarl carriers. They were faster, more agile, and deadlier. Like wolves attacking a wounded beast, the human fleet struck. Dravkarl ships, crippled from the electromagnetic blasts, were now easy targets. Their unbreakable fleet was breaking. One by one, their battleships were torn apart. For the first time in Dravkarl history, they were not the hunters. They were the hunted. Back on Bloodfang, Vorak was seething with rage. "This is not possible," he roared. His officers trembled. One of them hesitated before speaking. "Commander, we must fall back. Humans are not what we thought." Vorak's eyes glowed with fury. "No, we finish this now." But deep inside, he knew something terrifying. They had made a mistake, a fatal mistake. They had underestimated humanity. And now, they would pay the price. Vorak's claws dug into the metal of his command chair as he watched his fleet crumble. What was supposed to be a simple extermination mission had turned into a nightmare. Earth was not falling. Earth was fighting. And now, the once feared Dravkarl hunters were being hunted. In Earth's high orbit, the battle raged on. Dravkarl warships, known for their brute force, were now struggling. Their shield systems were collapsing, their weapons struggling to lock onto the fast and unpredictable human ships. Human fighters darted between them, striking with surgical precision. Boom! Another Dravkarl battleship erupted into flames as human missiles pierced its core. Escape pods ejected into space, but the humans did not let them go. "Destroy anything that remains hostile," General Ethan Carter ordered from the command center. This was not a battle anymore. This was revenge. On the surface of the moon, the last surviving Dravkarl warriors were in full retreat. Their elite ground forces, warriors who had once conquered planets without resistance, were now running like prey. The tunnels they had used to take cover were now death traps. The humans had set explosives and automated turrets, cutting them down before they could even regroup. One Dravkarl soldier, blood dripping from his wounds, gasped into his communicator. "Commander, we need evac." The humans. A single shot silenced him. A group of human special forces soldiers stepped over the corpse, their rifles still smoking. "They're finished here," one of them said coldly. Back in space, Vorak was furious. "The humans are cheating." he roared. His officers hesitated. One of them, a trembling navigator, whispered, "Commander, they're just smarter than we expected." Vorak turned slowly to face him. "Say that again." The officer gulped. "They set traps, sir. They knew our weaknesses before we even arrived." Vorak crushed his skull with a single strike. Silence filled the bridge. Then Vorak growled, "Prepare the planetary bombardment." If the humans would not bow, they would burn. On Earth, alarms blared. General Carter stared at the enemy fleet, now repositioning itself above Earth. A new tactic. "They're going to glass the planet," one officer whispered. Carter's expression darkened. "Let them try." He pressed a button. All missile silos. Fire. From across the planet, hidden nuclear and kinetic missile platforms erupted, launching hundreds of projectiles into the sky. The Dravkarl had faced resistance before. They had never faced this. As the first wave of human counterattacks reached the Dravkarl fleet, chaos erupted. Massive railgun slugs tore through their capital ships, bypassing shields and slicing through metal like paper. Nuclear warheads detonated in space, frying their sensors, leaving them blind. Vorak's bridge shook as his warship took multiple direct hits. "Sir," shields failing. Vorak clenched his fists. This was not how it was supposed to go. They were the predators, not the prey. But now, for the first time in Dravkarl history, they had found a species they could not break. And in the cold void of space, Vorak finally realized. They had awakened a monster. The once mighty Dravkarl fleet was burning. Vorak stood frozen as the holographic display of his fleet flickered with red warnings. Ship after ship was falling apart, their powerful shields useless against the relentless human assault. How is this happening?" Vorak whispered. His people had never lost a war. But today, they were not fighting prey. They were fighting monsters. Above Earth, the battle was turning into a massacre. Dravkarl warships tried to regroup, but the humans were too fast. Their ships moved unpredictably, striking in coordinated attacks that left no escape routes. Boom! Another Dravkarl cruiser exploded, sending burning debris across the battlefield. The few remaining ships tried to retreat, but Earth's railguns and missile silos made sure that none escaped. Human pilots spoke through intercepted channels. "Don't let them run. They came to kill us. Now they pay." Vorak clenched his jaw. Even in retreat, his forces were being hunted. It was an insult. No, more than that. It was humiliation. On the moon, the last Dravkarl ground forces were trapped. They had once walked as conquerors, but now they crawled like wounded animals. Inside an underground bunker, a wounded Dravkarl officer sent out a desperate transmission. "This is Commander Orthal, requesting immediate extraction. Our forces air." The wall behind him exploded. Dust and fire filled the room. As the smoke cleared, a group of human soldiers stepped inside. One of them, his armor covered in dust and blood, raised his weapon. Orthal barely had time to react before. Bang! The last Dravkarl officer on the moon fell lifeless to the ground. A human soldier stepped forward, picking up the Dravkarl's communicator. Extraction denied. In orbit, Vorak watched helplessly as his warriors fell. "We must retreat," an officer whispered. Vorak turned, eyes filled with rage. "Retreat." His voice was quiet. "Dangerous." The officer swallowed hard. "Sir, we have no choice." Vorak's claws dug into his armrest. He had come here to burn a planet. Instead, his empire was burning. And then, the worst thing happened. A message appeared on his screen. A human transmission. Vorak hesitated before playing it. The face of a human general appeared. His voice was calm. Cold. "Vorak, you thought you were unstoppable." He leaned closer. "Now you see what happens when you mess with humans." The screen cut to static. Vorak felt something he had never felt before. Fear. On Earth, the battle was over. The last Dravkarl ships were nothing but wreckage. General Carter stood in the command center, watching as human forces secured victory. A soldier approached him. "Sir, what do we do with the remaining Dravkarl survivors?" Carter's expression remained cold. "They wanted to exterminate us." He turned to the battlefield, where Dravkarl prisoners were being rounded up. Now, they learned what it's like to be the prey. Vorak's fleet was destroyed. His warriors were dead. And now, as his final warship tried to flee the battlefield, a single human ship locked onto him. A voice came through his speakers. "You don't get to leave." Vorak's eyes widened as a massive human railgun charged up, aiming directly at his ship. In his final moments, he realized the truth. Humans were not prey. Humans were the new apex predators. The Dravkarl Empire had ruled for centuries. They had conquered hundreds of planets, wiped out entire species, and crushed countless civilizations. But today, they were the hunted. The human fleet moved with terrifying precision. No mercy, no hesitation. They had waited too long for this moment. Earth had been attacked first. Now, the Dravkarl would feel humanity's wrath. On the edge of Dravkarl space, panic spread like wildfire. Colonies once filled with pride and arrogance now shook with fear. Evacuation alarms screamed as civilians tried to flee. The mighty Dravkarl warriors, who once laughed at the idea of a true enemy, now stood trembling at the incoming human fleet. One commander tried to rally his forces. "The humans are weak. They are just." Boom! His command center exploded before he could finish. A single human missile had turned the entire structure into fire and dust. Aboard the human flagship, General Carter watched the destruction. His officers stood in silence, waiting for his command. "Sir, the Dravkarl are trying to surrender," an officer reported. Carter didn't even blink. "They didn't offer us mercy," he said coldly. The officer nodded. "Orders, sir." Carter leaned forward. "Burn everything." On the surface of a Dravkarl colony, the invasion had begun. Human soldiers landed in drop pods, hitting the ground like meteorites. The Dravkarl defenders opened fire, but it was useless. Humans moved too fast. Their weapons were too advanced. The Dravkarl, once the apex predators, were dying like insects. A human soldier fired a railgun round. A single shot. A Dravkarl warrior exploded into pieces. The rest turned to run. Humans didn't let them. Across the Empire, the same thing happened. The once invincible Dravkarl worlds were falling one by one. Their warriors were hunted down. Their cities were turned to rubble. The message was clear. Humanity would not be stopped. Humanity would not forgive. Deep in the Dravkarl homeworld, Emperor Xalvorin watched in horror. "Impossible," he whispered. The humans were supposed to be weak. They were supposed to be prey. Instead, they were unstoppable. His advisors begged him to flee. "We must surrender," one of them cried. Xalvorin's claws tightened into fists. Never. The Dravkarl had never surrendered. They would fight to the last breath. But deep down, he knew the truth. This war was over, and humanity had won. The Dravkarl homeworld was burning. The sky was filled with black smoke and the glow of massive explosions. The once mighty cities, built over centuries, were now reduced to rubble. Every street echoed with screams, gunfire, and the distant roar of human warships. The great empire of the Dravkarl, undefeated for thousands of years, was finally falling. Inside the imperial palace, Emperor Xalvorin stood frozen. His golden throne room shook as another explosion ripped through the city. The walls cracked. The mighty banners of the Dravkarl Empire fell to the ground. "Your Majesty, we must leave," a general shouted. Xalvorin's clawed hands trembled. For the first time in his life, he felt fear. The humans had done the impossible. They had crushed his fleets, destroyed his armies, And now they stood at his gates. His people were dying. His empire was gone. On the surface, human soldiers moved through the ruined streets. They met little resistance. Most Dravkarl warriors had already surrendered or fled. But some still fought. A squad of Dravkarl elite guards ambushed a group of human marines. They charged with blades drawn, roaring their final war cry. A second later, they were dead. The human commander didn't even slow down. "These beasts thought they ruled the stars," he muttered. He stepped over their bodies. Not anymore. In the skies above, the last Dravkarl warships made a final stand. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. Aboard the Doomfang, the last surviving Dravkarl battleship, Admiral Korvik gave his final order. All ships ram the enemy. It was a desperate act, a last attempt to die with honor. But it was pointless. The human fleet had already anticipated it. One by one, the Dravkarl warships exploded before they could even get close. Humanity had learned all their tricks, and they had countered them all. Back in the Imperial Palace, Salvorin knew it was over. The doors burst open. A group of human soldiers entered. Their weapons were raised, but their faces were calm. Their leader, a tall man with cold eyes, stepped forward. "You're beaten," he said. Salvorin bared his fangs. "I will not kneel." The human commander didn't smile. "We don't need you to." A gunshot echoed through the throne room. And with that, the last emperor of the Dravkarl fell. The war was over. The Dravkarl were no longer the rulers of the galaxy. Humanity had proven itself. They were not prey. They were the new apex predators. And the galaxy would never forget it. The war was over. The Dravkarl, once feared across the stars, no longer ruled the galaxy. Their empire was shattered, their leaders dead or captured, and their fleets turned to ashes. But for humanity, this was only the beginning. On Earth, celebrations filled every city. Millions of people cheered in the streets. Flags waved, fireworks exploded, and the names of fallen heroes were etched into history. But in the war rooms of Earth's leaders, there was no celebration. They knew the truth. This victory had changed everything. Aboard the UHS Vengeance, the flagship of the human fleet, Admiral Cole stood on the bridge. Through the massive viewport, he gazed at the burning remnants of the Dravkarl homeworld. A young officer approached. "Sir, reports confirm that the last Dravkarl strongholds have surrendered." Cole nodded. The war was truly over. But something bothered him. "What happens now?" the officer asked. Cole exhaled slowly. "That's the real question." In the ruins of the Dravkarl Empire, chaos spread. Without their rulers, dozens of species once enslaved by the Dravkarl rose up. Civil wars erupted. Former Dravkarl colonies declared independence. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted forever. And at the center of it all, humanity stood as the new dominant force. Back on Earth, the United Terran Council debated the future. Some believed that humanity should rule the stars, taking the Dravkarl's place. Others warned that power corrupts. If humanity became an empire, would they be any different from the Dravkarl? The debate grew heated. But one thing was clear: humanity was now a galactic superpower, and the rest of the universe would have to accept it. In the deep void of space, far from human territory, unseen eyes watched. Other alien species had witnessed humanity's rise. Some were afraid. Some saw opportunity. And some began to plan. Because if humans could destroy the galaxy's most feared predators, what else were they capable of?